Welcome to Son of a Glitch. Join us as we explore some of the internet's craziest glitch stories. Story 1. One evening about 17 years ago, I was at home with my then boyfriend. It was a regular, forgettable night, the kind that should dissolve into the background noise of a long relationship. We'd eaten something simple, watched something dumb, and drifted into our usual split. He stayed downstairs with the TV, and I went up to bed. He always laughed too loudly at whatever he watched, the kind of laugh that bounced off walls and carried up the stairs even when the volume was low. Back then, I found it comforting. It meant I always knew where he was. I remember the way the house felt when I climbed the stairs, quiet, warm, familiar. The carpet gave softly under my feet. On the landing, the hallway seemed dimmer than it should have, like the bulbs were tired. I pushed open the bedroom door, and that thin hinge squeak I knew by heart answered me. I didn't bother with the overhead light, just the small bedside lamp, which threw a soft puddle of gold across the duvet. I have always slept the same way, on my stomach, left cheek against the pillow, arms tucked in. It's ridiculous how precise the body can be about such habits. That night I slid into the same groove, as if the bed had molded to me. The sheets felt cool against my shins. I could hear the faint drone of the TV 2 floors below, and woven through it, his laugh, big, unembarrassed, real. For a while I lay there letting the sound rise and fall, letting the day fall away. A couple of minutes passed like that. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. They were unmistakable, weight meeting wood in a measured rhythm, I knew, as well as my own heartbeat. Not fast, not hesitant. Just him coming up to bed. I didn't move. I closed my eyes and decided not to. There's a quiet pleasure in pretending to be asleep and listening to someone you love cross the room. I heard the bedroom door open. Even with my eyes closed, I felt the shape of him enter, the small charge in the air, the way your skin knows someone else is near. The mattress dipped behind me. It wasn't subtle. The bed tilted toward the center, my body sliding that small, familiar inch as it always did when someone took the other side. The weight settled, not a shift or bounce, but a human presence lowering, distributing. He'd lain down. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. He didn't speak. That was the first odd thing. Usually there'd be some comment, a good night, a hand brushing my shoulder, an exaggerated sigh as he settled in. Nothing. The quiet pressed in. I waited. Still nothing. He didn't move at all. No rustle of sheets, no elbow shifting, no warmth of breath across the back of my neck. Just the steady fact of someone on the mattress beside me, perfectly still. I kept my eyes closed longer than I should have. I told myself he was tired, that he didn't want to wake me, that maybe he was scrolling through something on his phone. But the silence wasn't restful. It grew heavy and strange. A kind of wrongness curled at the edges of it. Finally, curiosity pushed past the comfort of staying still. I rolled over and opened my eyes. There was no one in the bed. I sat up fast, the way you do when your body tries to catch up to a thought it doesn't like. The room looked exactly as it had when I'd come in. The soft pool of lamplight, the book on the nightstand, the slant of my pillow, the barely disturbed sheet beside me. I even pressed my palm to the space where he should have been, the way people do in movies, as if heat lingers like a signature. It was cool. Okay, I said out loud to no one. I stood, the carpet rough against my bare feet, and looked around the room. The closet door was shut. The bathroom door was open, and the light was off. I told myself he must have gone back downstairs quietly, though I had neither heard him get up nor felt the bed lift when he left. I went down the hall, down the stairs, and into the living room. He was there, exactly where I had left him, in the same slouched angle on the sofa, caught in the galaxy light of the television. When he saw me, he grinned in that big way, unbothered, and said, "You're up again? Have you been upstairs?" I asked, and my voice sounded thin even to me. He frowned, not annoyed, just confused. "No, I've been here." "Why?" He hadn't moved. He hadn't left the room. He hadn't paused whatever ridiculous show was making him laugh. The truth of it was right there in the way the cushions still cupped his body, the half-finished drink on the table sweating a ring, the scene on the TV still rolling. It made less sense than if he'd denied murder with a knife in his hand. I told him what had happened, how I'd heard the footsteps, how the door had opened, how the mattress dipped under a body that wasn't there. He shook his head immediately, like swatting a fly. "Impossible," he said, and when I didn't laugh, he stood and walked with me room to room. We checked the house. It felt silly and necessary at once. He opened the closet. I pulled back the shower curtain. We looked under the bed and behind the curtains and, because the mind demands ceremony when confronted with the inexplicable, We checked the locks on every window and door. All latched. All still. No sign that anyone had come in, or left, or existed between. Back in the bedroom, I stood staring at the bed as if it might confess. The mattress stared back, flat and undisturbed. I lay down again, because what else was there to do? He kissed my forehead and went back downstairs. For a long time I didn't close my eyes. When I finally did, I stayed awake inside the dark, waiting for the door to open again, listening for footsteps that never came. I have never forgotten that night. The distance between feeling his weight and finding nothing was only seconds, but those seconds opened something I've never been able to close. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't half dreaming. The sequence was clean. Sound, movement, weight, certainty, nothing. People don't like this story. Whenever I tell it, conversation stutters and then veers. Someone changes the subject, suddenly thirsty or suddenly remembering a thing they have to do in another room. It's not that they don't believe me exactly. It's that belief makes the world looser around the edges, and most of us prefer tight seams. For a while, I reached for a ghost. It was the simplest container for something I couldn't fit anywhere else. But I don't really love that explanation. The more years that stack between me and that night, the more the word that keeps nudging my shoulder is glitch. Not in a memes and sunglasses way. More like a misfold. A brief overlap. As if whatever runs under what we call ordinary glinted through, and something that wasn't my boyfriend wore his weight for a second and set it down again. I know what I felt. I know what I didn't see. And sometimes, when I turn over in bed and the mattress is empty beside me, I still expect to find a dent that isn't there. Story 2. I've had a handful of strange moments in my life, but this one is the earliest that still lands with a thud when I think about it. It started out harmlessly enough. A school friend invited my brother and me to the water park. Their parents had a big van with the sliding door and the long bench seats, and they were happy to take everyone together. Summer, no homework, the promise of chlorine and sunburns. None of it seemed like the setup for anything unusual. What was unusual, at least in hindsight, was the dream I had the night before. I didn't think to call it a dream at the time. It felt more like a thing that happened and then got filed away. In it, we pulled up to a little building at the park entrance to buy a parking pass. I remember how specific it was. The paint on the walls a tired tan, a wide horizontal window cut into the front so drivers could lean out to talk to the attendant, a fan turning lazily on the ceiling. The woman at the window wearing a pale yellow shirt and a plastic name tag I couldn't read. She slid a ticket across a counter toward us, smiled without showing teeth, and we rolled forward. Gravel crackled under the tires. The dream wasn't dramatic, just crisp, like a photograph with sound. The next morning I woke up and got on with the day. Breakfast, sunscreen, a frantic hunt for flip-flops I'd somehow lost in my own room. We went to our friend's house, everyone buzzing with that kid energy that makes adults tired just looking at it. The van door rumbled open, and we climbed in, my brother and I taking the bench in the back. The fabric was scratchy and sun-faded and smelled faintly of old French fries. We pulled away from the curb and headed out. I wasn't thinking about the dream. I wasn't thinking about anything deeper than how fast I could get from the car to the water. The drive was the usual summer blur, bright sky, heat shimmering off the road, the radio too low to hear clearly over the windows downwind. And then we turned into the water park entrance road, and everything got strange. We slowed in the line of cars inching toward the gate, and the little tan building appeared like a coin surfacing in a fountain. The exact building, the exact window, the exact fan. I felt a weird click in my head, like a drawer shutting. My stomach didn't drop, I didn't get dizzy. It was calmer than that. I just knew everything that was about to happen in a way that had nothing to do with guessing. We rolled forward. The woman leaned to the window wearing the same pale yellow shirt, the same not quite toothy smile. She slid the ticket across the counter, and the driver of our van took it. Her hair was pinned back in a bun with 2 escaped wisps curling by her ears. A little plastic cup of pens sat next to the receipt printer. I could have told you that before I saw it. Gravel crackled under the tires as we pulled through the gate. The sound wasn't just familiar. It was exactly the sound I'd already heard. I didn't say anything out loud right then. I think a part of me was waiting for the feeling to fizzle, for the next thing to break the pattern and prove I was just remembering wrong. But nothing broke. The sequence held. The angle of the sun on the building's edge, the step of a man in a red t-shirt crossing in front of us, the small pause as the driver adjusted the ticket on the dashboard so it wouldn't slide off. All of it lined up like I was watching a tape I'd already seen. By the time we parked, my certainty had tipped into curiosity. I told my brother, "I've seen this before." He shrugged the way siblings do when you're being weird, and he wants to be first to the lazy river. I tried it again with our friend. I had a dream about this exact gate, and got a polite, "Huh," and the thud of the van door rolling shut. We spent the day doing exactly what kids do, racing to the slides, burning our feet on hot concrete, gulping pool water we swore we weren't gulping. The feeling didn't follow me past the entrance. It wasn't like the whole park was mapped in my head. It was just that one compact piece of it, as if someone had dropped a very specific memory into my pocket and then walked away. It wasn't until later, sun-tired, towel-damp, the van heavy with the smell of sunscreen, that I brought it up again. I told the adults about the way the entrance had unfolded and the woman's shirt and the exact fan. My parents listened, eyebrows up. They traded a look and said I must have been there before. Maybe when I was little. Maybe with some other family. Maybe I'd forgotten. I knew I hadn't. I didn't say it with attitude, I just knew. The knowing felt different from any regular memory. It wasn't a hazy, "I think we went there once," or a hand-me-down story that had settled as fact because I'd heard it so many times. It was a clean line, I had never been there. And also, I had seen it. For a while after, I tried to reverse engineer a reasonable explanation, because that's what you do when something makes no sense, and you don't want it to be special. Maybe I'd seen the entrance in a brochure. Maybe all water park gates look like off-brand DMV windows, and I was pattern matching. But the more I replayed it, the less the explanations fit. The specifics were too specific. The woman's shirt. The pen cup. The way the gravel sounded right then under our tires. That wasn't general familiarity. That was precision. Story 3. I still think about the Japanese restaurant that didn't exist. It was several years ago, back when I was still with my first boyfriend. We were in that long, comfortable stretch of a relationship where most evenings blur together. Takeaway, TV, the same 5 streets on our evening walks. One rainy autumn night, we decided to do something different. The rain was that steady, silver kind that sticks to streetlights and makes the pavements shine. It felt like a night for a plan. "Let's try Japanese," one of us said. In England at the time, proper Japanese places weren't on every corner. We opened his laptop and started hunting. After a few chain restaurants and places suspiciously labeled fusion, we landed on a site that felt right, black and white design, tidy menu, a few modest photos of ramen and bento. It looked unshowy in a reassuring way. There it was, an address in a town a couple of bus rides away, and a phone number pinned neatly at the top. I dialed. A man answered on the first ring, calm, businesslike, faintly polite. Yes, they were open at 7. Yes, a table for 2 would be fine. I thanked him and wrote the address down on the back of an envelope. We watched the clock creep toward evening, then pulled on coats and set out, feeling a little smug about our small adventure. We didn't have a car then, so we took 2 buses. The second one was almost empty. Rain webbed across the windows in diagonal threads. The interior lights hummed. I kept checking the address as if the letters might float off the page if I didn't pin them down with my eyes. The streets outside turned unfamiliar in that mild, exciting way only public transport can make them. When we got off, the rain had softened to a fine mist. We were, according to the bus stop map and my scrap of envelope, already on the right street. Perfect. Restaurants tucked into terraced buildings, newsagents, a barber's with steamed-up glass, nothing out of place. We walked the length of the street once, reading numbers, peering at signs, getting in pedestrians' way with apologies. No Japanese restaurant. At the end, we checked the address again, frowned in the soft rain, and turned back. "It must be closer to the other end," I said, as if that explained anything. We tried again. We read every number we passed aloud like we were calling bingo. The place should have been at number 7. We reached number 9. The next building was a car park, an open, fenced rectangle of tarmac with a few puddles and a crisp packet running laps in the wind. And then, after the car park, came a proper building again, number 5. We stood there blinking at the numbers like they'd misbehaved. "Maybe it's across the road," he said. Across the road, the sequence behaved exactly as it should. For then 6. Our side, 9, gaping nothing, 5. We crossed back and forth a few times, as if perspective might make number 7 appear from a different angle. It didn't. The car park continued to be a car park. I pulled out my phone and dialed the restaurant. The phone made that single, rude bleep, the one that means the call cannot connect. I tried again. Bleep. He tried from his phone. Bleep. We took turns like the line might answer if it heard a different voice. Nothing. We started inventing explanations out loud. Maybe the restaurant had moved and hadn't updated the site. Maybe they'd closed and someone had already demolished the building, the fastest development in the country. Maybe the address was wrong by one digit, and we were meant to be at number 17, or 70, or 7A, or 7 elsewhere. The longer we stood there, the more the rain found its way down our collars. We walked the street a third time, slower. I checked down a side alley that smelled like wet cardboard. He peered through the window of a shuttered bakery in case a Japanese restaurant had somehow disguised itself as a display of iced buns. The car park remained obstinately numbered nothing at all. Number 7 remained a polite fiction. Let's just call a cab to somewhere else, he said, but we were stubborn in the way you get when logic insists a thing should exist. We had phoned the man. He had answered. We had a reservation. I had written the address in my own unmistakable handwriting. There was simply no version of events where the restaurant didn't exist. And yet, eventually, defeated and damp, we gave up. We rode the bus home in that chilly silence that isn't angry, just baffled. Back at the flat, our shoes left dark commas on the mat. We ordered Indian from the place that always put too many onions in the bhajis and opened 2 beers. Let's look it up again, I said because I wanted the universe to apologize. We opened the laptop. I typed the restaurant's name into the search bar the same way I had earlier. The site should have been there. We'd been on it an hour before. Instead, we got a page of unrelated results. A Japanese restaurant 3 counties away, a recipe blog, a dead link. I tried the exact phrase I'd used before. Nothing. I tried the address. The map blinking politely showed us the same street with the same car park-shaped hole, where number 7 should have been. We tried the phone number. No listing. No cached version. No fragments of text hanging around in the search results like the tail of a comet. It was as if the site had never existed. If it had been some little corner of the internet, I would have blamed a typo, but we'd been there. I'd read the menu aloud. He'd asked whether I was going to be brave and order the thing I couldn't pronounce. We'd both seen it. We sat there with the laptop between us like it might confess. Eventually we slid the beers closer and let the curry fog up the windows. We didn't know what to call what had happened, so we didn't call it anything. We just ate. I still don't have a satisfying explanation. I've collected the easy options because they're comforting. I copied the address wrong. The website belonged to a different town with the same street name. The restaurant shuttered that afternoon and the site went down coincidentally. There was once a number 7, and it was erased from the sequence by a bureaucratic shrug and a car park. All of those make a kind of administrative sense. None of them explain the man answering the phone and taking our booking. None of them explain the way the number refused to exist an hour later. Story 4. I still think about the day my brother got shot and the bullet bounced off him like it had changed its mind. It was years ago, one of those warm afternoons when the light hangs in the air and you can smell dry grass. We were out by the edge of a field behind our neighborhood, scrub trees on one side, a drainage ditch cutting along the other, the kind of place kids wander to when they don't feel like being inside. We weren't doing anything important, just walking, talking about nothing. I remember the steady hum of insects, the heat lying heavy on our shoulders, the slow breeze that didn't do much but still felt like something. There was a sound far away, sharp but muffled by distance. If you've lived around hunters or farms long enough, you know the noise. Your brain files it under someone else's business. We didn't even look up. A second later, my brother bent forward like something had tugged him from the front. He grabbed his stomach with both hands. It wasn't dramatic, more like the way you'd react if a big bug hit you or you got stung by a hornet. "What?" I said, already stepping toward him. He didn't answer for a beat. His forehead wrinkled, his mouth pulled tight. Then he looked down, frowning, and I followed his gaze. There was a mark just below his ribs, a small red circle rising out of his skin, already starting to swell. It looked like a welt from a slingshot or a vicious rubber band. The fabric of his t-shirt had a tiny dark smudge where it had touched the spot. He lifted the hem, and I reached without thinking, the way you do when you're trying to see if something is serious. The skin was hot to the touch. He winced when I pressed around it, then swatted my hand away, annoyed. "Ow," he said, like I'd caused it. And there on the ground between us lay a small, misshapen bit of metal. For a second my brain refused to label it. It was gray and dull, and a little flattened on one side, sitting there in the dust like a pebble with a secret. Then the word arrived all at once, bullet. We both stared at it, and the rest of the world went quiet. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. I remember the way the sunlight hit the little thing, a bright pinprick off the dented curve. I was the first to move. I crouched and touched it with the tip of a finger, as if it might still be hot. It wasn't. I picked it up and turned it over in my palm. It had that greasy, metallic feel of old coins, and one edge was slightly mushroomed where the impact had deformed it. "You got shot," I said as calmly as I could. It sounded ridiculous coming out of my mouth, like a line from a bad movie. But the evidence was right there, the welt rising on his skin, the faint hole in his shirt fabric, the spent piece of metal in my hand. "No," he said immediately, as if arguing could make it untrue. But he kept looking at the welt, and his voice got smaller. "Did I?" We did the practical things first. I checked for blood. There was hardly any, just a dot where the skin had broken. No torn flesh, no embedded metal, no second wound. He moved his arms, twisted a little, breathed deep. No pain except the sting where he'd been hit. The fear that had leapt up in my throat subsided just enough for me to think. People fired guns in those woods sometimes. A bullet travels and slows. We'd heard the shot. We hadn't seen anyone. It had to have been a long way off, far enough that by the time it reached him, it didn't have enough energy left to break through. It hit, flattened, fell. We walked home slowly, like moving too fast might undo the luck. I kept the bullet cupped in my palm the whole time, as if putting it in a pocket would turn it back into a hypothetical. Every few steps we looked at each other and half laughed, half swore. "What are the odds?" he said, more to the air than to me. Back at the house, our mother went from 0 to emergency in under a second. I held up my hand before she could start yelling and showed her the bullet. Sometimes the way to convince someone something is real is to give them the weight of it. She took it, and then she took his shirt off, and then she took a breath, a long, shaky one that she let out slowly. The welt looked worse against the kitchen light, angrier, redder, but it was still only a welt. We cleaned the spot, iced it, argued briefly about urgent care, and then didn't go. He sat at the table with a bag of frozen peas on his stomach, acting braver than he felt. After a while the color faded to a dull pink, the kind of bruise you get from being in the wrong place at the right time. We kept the bullet. Of course we did. He found a little glass jar with a metal lid, one of those jars that once held nails or spices, and dropped it in. It made a sound too big for its size, a bright tink that echoed in the jar's emptiness. He put the jar on his dresser. For a long time after, whenever someone new came over, he'd point to it and say, with the matter-of-fact pride of the narrowly missed, "That bounced off me." People always laughed first and then didn't. Story 5. A classic summer thunderstorm was rolling in, the kind you can smell before you see. The air had that metallic, charged tang to it, and the sky was this bruised yellow-gray that made the trees look sharper than usual. It was windy, properly windy, but the rain hadn't started yet. The leaves were all showing their pale undersides at once, flipping and hissing against each other, and the power lines were singing that thin, high note they get when the gusts come in sideways. I've always liked watching storms, so I took a lawn chair out to the middle of the yard and sat there like an audience of one waiting for the opening act. I made a point of setting up in the open, no trees overhead, no gutters dripping, no bird feeders or patio umbrellas nearby. 10 feet from anything was the rule, give or take. I didn't want the wind to peel a branch off and crown me with it, and there's something about an empty radius that feels honest when you're trying to gauge the weather. The gusts would come in cold and strong and then ease off, and in those brief pauses the world felt like it was holding its breath. I leaned back, eyes on the low, fast clouds. The first distant thunder sounded like furniture being moved in a house you couldn't see. I was cataloging details in the way I always do, direction of the wind shift, the way the temperature dropped by degrees, the smell of dust that gets kicked up ahead of the rain, when out of nowhere, something hit me square in the face. Not a leaf, not a twig, not a bug, a crouton. It smacked me right on the cheekbone with this oddly decisive little thwack and bounced into my lap. I blinked. There was that split second of what? Where your brain flips through possibilities like index cards and comes up empty. I looked down, and there it was, a small, square, perfectly dry, perfectly ordinary crouton. Seasoned even. I could see the green flecks and a dusting of something like garlic powder stuck in the toasted pores. For context, it wasn't gusting at that exact moment. The wind had just eased, the way it does in the lull before another push. Nothing else was moving. The air was still enough that you could hear the screen door on the house behind us bang as someone inside adjusted a window. And yet, somehow, in that stillness, A crouton had traveled at just the right speed and angle to tag me like a tiny, crunchy comet. I picked it up. It wasn't soggy. It wasn't dirty. No grass clung to it, no mud. It looked like it had just come out of a bag and into my face. I glanced around the yard automatically, as if the culprit might be crouched behind the hydrangeas with a salad bowl. No one. The neighbors' yards were empty. The only movement was the clouds sliding like a low ceiling and the soft shudder of leaves bracing for the next gust. I stood and did a slow turn, holding the crouton between finger and thumb like evidence. We don't have a bird feeder. No open kitchens. No picnic tables loaded with food. The nearest house that might plausibly be hosting a backyard salad was across the alley and behind a fence that blocked the view. And even if someone had hurled a handful of toppings into the wind, what were the odds that a single, intact crouton would make the journey, thread through the lull, and find me in the middle of a bare lawn? It didn't matter. My cheek still stung the tiniest bit. The crouton was real. I took it inside to show my family because that felt like the responsible thing to do when reality does something dumb. Get witnesses. Look what just hit me, I said, as if I were presenting a rare insect to a room full of entomologists. They barely looked up. Someone said, "Huh." Someone else said, "Close the door, you're letting the hot air in." I stood there with my crunchy meteorite cupped in my palm and realized I was not going to get the reaction I wanted. I put the crouton on the counter like a found artifact and went back outside. By then the wind had picked up again, another cool rush running ahead of the rain, and I sat down in my chair and tried to reverse engineer a plausible chain of events. A bird? Maybe a gull had stolen food from somewhere and dropped a piece in transit. But we were a long way from water, and gulls aren't common in our neighborhood. A crow, then? A crow could absolutely steal a crouton for reasons known only to crows. But I hadn't seen any birds. And even if a bird had dropped it, I would have expected it to tumble, catch in the grass, pick up some dirt on the way down. This thing had the immaculate dryness of a cupboard. The next theory, a backyard party nearby. Someone shakes out a tablecloth or flings a salad, an updraft catches a single crouton, and a microburst does the rest. I pictured it like a cartoon. The crouton lifted gently, borne aloft on invisible currents, then accelerated by a localized gust and delivered to me with comic precision. It was so stupid it almost started to feel beautiful. The atmosphere as Rube Goldberg machine. The universe as a clumsy waiter. I checked my cheekbone in my phone's camera and laughed at myself. A faint red spot. Proof of impact. I sat there for a while longer watching the sky rearrange itself. The first fat drops finally arrived, those heavy scouts that darken the pavement in leopard spots before the real rain commits. I folded the chair and took it in. On my way past the counter, I looked for the crouton without meaning to and found it exactly where I'd left it, still dry, still blandly confident. Any ideas? I asked the room. No one had any. No one cared, really. Their weather was inside. Mine was outside and had thrown me a snack. Story 6. In my parents' bedroom, there was this big walk-in closet that acted like two. Technically, it was one long space with two separate doors, one on my dad's side of the room, one on my mom's. A high wooden shelf ran down the middle, and just under it, a single metal rod stretched the length of the closet. When clothes were hanging, they made a dense canopy through the middle so that the two sides felt separate. You could duck under the row of shirts and jackets and pass from one side to the other, but most of the time my parents kept to their halves. Her side was neat, work blouses, dresses by color, shoe boxes labeled with a black marker. His side was suits, sports coats he almost never wore, a row of ties that drooped like sleepy snakes. The closet had its own light with a pull chain that clicked twice when you tugged it, and once that door shut, the little room was its own world. That night, my mom said, she went in to put something away. The bedroom was dim. The only other light was the one from the bathroom, a soft spill across the carpet. She stood on her side, stepped out of her slippers because she hates scuffing the floor, and turned the closet light on. That small space lit up in a warm cone, wood fabric, the chrome rod with nicks in it where hangers had scraped 1,000 times. She told me she glanced up, the way you do when you're thinking about something else entirely, and through the narrow gap between the shelf and the rod she saw my dad walk into his side of the closet. It wasn't a full view, just the partial angle the architecture allowed. A shoulder, an elbow, the line of his forearm. Enough to register him the way you recognize a person in the next aisle at the grocery store without seeing their face. She didn't call out right away because why would she? He was home, He was where he should be. He was looking for something to wear. Then came the sounds. She heard the metal hangers slide and clink as he moved them aside. That sound is precise, metal rasping over metal, a little jump where the rod was nicked. She knew it as well as her own voice. The mass of clothes in the middle swayed, not dramatically, but with the subtle back and forth of fabric brushed by a hand on the other side. She could feel him there, not just see and hear, some invisible pressure in the space that happens when another body is very near. She started talking. Something small and domestic, she said. A half thought about a grocery item, or a reminder about a call. The kind of talk you do through a doorway. Hey, don't forget, that sort of thing. She spoke into the middle of the closet, like you'd talk to someone you know is listening. No answer. Hangers still moving. The clothes still swayed. She tried again, louder this time. Nothing. Honestly, she told me, laughing a little at herself. I assumed he was ignoring me. And then she heard the bathroom door open. It was the soft, hollow sound of that particular door, followed by the little slap of feet on the tile threshold. She turned her head out of habit, voice aiming toward him now, and poked her head out of the closet into the bedroom. My dad was there in the bathroom doorway, hair wet, towel around his waist, blinking at her. He had just come out of the shower. Steam drifted past him like a slow cloud. He looked completely surprised to see her halfway out of the closet, mid-sentence. What? He said, bewildered. I didn't hear you. My mom said her mouth opened and closed, and she didn't answer at first. She turned back into the closet, exactly the way you might when someone calls your name from two different places at once. The hangers were still. The clothes in the middle had stopped moving. The air felt ordinary. She took 2 steps and ducked under the shirts to my dad's side. No one. No weight shifting the carpet. No after rustle, the way fabric sometimes continues to sway. Just the faint smell of his aftershave lingering from earlier, which is the kind of trick your mind plays when it's panicking and trying not to. She told me she stood there with her hands on the rod, fingers resting on the cold chrome, and waited for some delayed piece of logic to slot in. Maybe he'd come in, changed his mind, and left. Maybe she'd heard him from the bathroom, and the sound bounced weirdly. Maybe she'd moved the hangers herself without realizing. But the sequence in her memory was clean. She had watched him enter, no question. She had heard the hangers, no question. She had seen the clothes sway, no question. She had spoken to him, and up until the second she turned to the bathroom door, she swore to me she could still see him in that closet. She stepped back out into the bedroom and looked at my dad, really looked, taking stock as if proof might be on his skin. Drops of water clung to his shoulders. A line from the bath mat printed along his ankle. When she asked, "Have you been in the closet?" his bewilderment sharpened into a kind of offended confusion. "I literally just got out of the shower," he said, gesturing at himself like Exhibit A water. "Steam. Towel." She went back in and did the practical, embarrassing thing. She searched. She opened the drawers on his side, ridiculous as it sounds. She shifted the suits. She even crouched and checked under the hanging clothes, that childhood impulse to look for a person in a place too small for them to hide. Nothing. She tugged the pull chain and turned the light off, then on again, as if toggling the closet might reset whatever had misplayed. When she tells it now, she's not trying to convince anyone. That's part of what makes me believe her. She doesn't sell it hard or add flourishes. She just lays it out in the same measured order. I saw him, I heard him, I spoke to him, the bathroom door opened, he was wet, the closet was empty. Her certainty sits there like an object on a table. As a kid, the story made the house feel thin around the edges, like a place where two versions could overlap for a moment if you stood in the right spot. As an adult, I hear the details, the pull chain click, the nicked rod, the sway of fabric, and it feels even stranger because those are the exact details you don't get wrong. The sounds things make have a fingerprint. I've tried on generous explanations. Memory is an editor with a heavy hand. The brain fills gaps with what fits best. Steam makes air wave. Maybe it moved the clothes. But the bathroom vent didn't point that way. Sound carries. Maybe the hanger clink came from her own side. But the nicked rod rasp is only on his. And anyway, explanations that depend on maybe don't erase her experience. They just put a thin film over it. The story shows through. Sometimes I picture that closet empty now. Different house, different owners, no one who remembers the click of the chain. I imagine the two doors open at once and the middle soft with fabric, and I see what my mom saw. The shape of someone you know on the other side, present enough to trigger all your senses, and then not present at all. She swears up and down that right up to the second she turned her head to the bathroom, He was there, half hidden by sleeves, moving the hangers. And then he wasn't. There isn't a tidy ending. She finished what she was doing, turned off the light, and came to bed. My dad teased her gently until she didn't laugh, and then he didn't tease anymore. The next morning the closet was just a closet again. But when she tells me the story, even now, I can hear the hangers moving in my head and feel the small, impossible weight of someone who isn't there taking up space. Story 7. My dad died in 2013, and the house got very quiet in a way I didn't understand until then. It wasn't just the absence of his voice or his footsteps. It was like all the objects had agreed to stop making little noises. Drawers shut softer. The kettle didn't seem to boil as hard. Even the floorboards gave up their creaks, unless you really asked for them. My mom moved through that quiet like someone learning to walk on ice, careful, controlled, always bracing for a slip that didn't come. His walk-in closet became the epicenter of everything she couldn't make herself do. It had always been his territory, a neat grid of suits for work, shirts in sober colors, ties like a muted rainbow along the wall, leather shoes lined like soldiers under the hanging rails. He believed in dry cleaning and cedar blocks. He believed in a spare belt rolled, just so in the corner of a drawer. After he died, she shut the door and left it as it was. If she had to go into the bedroom, her eye slid past that door like it was a gap in a photograph. She didn't touch it for 4 years. Not once. If you asked about it, she'd say, "Not yet," with the finality of someone closing a book. Last year, she decided she was ready. Decided might be the wrong word. She told me she woke up, made coffee, and realized she couldn't keep walking around that door. She wanted the space back, or she wanted not to be afraid of it anymore. Maybe those are the same thing. She turned on the bedroom light, stood there for a minute with her hand on the knob, and opened the closet. The smell hit her like a wall. His cologne, trapped in fabric and wool and leather, came out all at once, sharp, clean, familiar. She said it was like he'd just leaned in to kiss her goodbye on the way to work. It pulled tears out of her eyes before she knew she was crying. She stood breathing it in, and hating that she was breathing it in. It felt like mercy and cruelty at the same time. It's not unusual, she told herself out loud. Of course it still smells like him. The suits were still there. The coats, the shirts, the ties. The smell had had 4 years to soak and steep. She reached for the light chain, clicked it off, closed the door, and walked away. Enough for one morning. That night, getting ready for bed, she saw a pale line under the closet door. The light was on. She swore at herself, annoyed more than anything else, because going back in meant going back in. She opened the door, tugged the chain, watched the bulb go dark, and shut it again. Later, she woke to use the bathroom. The room was dim except for a soft glow at the floor, the closet light back on. This time her stomach dropped. She knew she'd turned it off. Twice. She opened the door, switched it off again, and told herself, firmly like talking to a child, that she'd done it properly now. The next afternoon she came home from work, set her bag down, and saw the same band of light under the door. No one else had been in the house. The air conditioning hadn't kicked a chain. There wasn't even a draft in that room to play with the pull. She stood staring at the door for a long minute, then opened it, reached up, and unscrewed the bulb. She set it on the shelf with the old shoe-polished tins, and shut the door with both hands flat against it, like sealing something in. When she told me about it on the phone, she tried to keep her voice neutral, but I could hear the wet edges of the memory. I don't jump to haunted explanations. I'm the sort who inventories the plausible first. I said maybe the chain wasn't catching. Maybe an old switch was bouncing. Maybe after 4 years of no use, the fixture was glitchy. I suggested we replace it with a new light and a door switch, so it would only turn on when opened. She said maybe. Then she said very softly, "I think I was turning it on." She didn't mean literally. She meant some part of her she couldn't watch was making excuses to open that door again, to stand in that smell because it hurt, and because it was the only place he still existed in the house in a way her body believed. "If the light's on, you have to go in," she said, half laughing at herself. "You're not going in to cry. You're going in to turn off a light." I believed her, and I didn't. Both things can be true. Wiring can be weird. Grief can be weirder. Either way, she left the bulb unscrewed. As far as I know, it's still sitting there among the shoe creams and spare laces, a small, harmless solution to an unfixable problem. My wife and I visited her last month. She lives in another state now, same house, smaller life. We cooked dinner together, and she sent us home with leftovers wrapped like gifts. I slept in my old room and noticed, as always, How the sounds of the house return the moment your body is in the bed you learned to sleep in. I didn't go into the closet. It didn't cross my mind, which seems ridiculous to me now. Story 9. I dreamt I was on a train. Not a particular train I recognized, just the kind you end up on when you're going somewhere practical. Work, a relative's house, anywhere that doesn't require thinking. The car was half full. People had that late evening quiet about them, coats unbuttoned, bags tucked between ankles, faces lit by their own thoughts. The fluorescent lights hummed in a way I could feel in my teeth. I remember the smell, metal, warm dust, stale coffee. I remember the seats were that scratchy fabric with a pattern that tries to hide stains. A man sat directly in front of me. Blue jacket, a little shiny at the elbows. Dark hair that needed a cut. He rested one hand on the pole by the seat and let his head wobble with the motion of the car. The rhythm of the tracks settled into that hypnotic clack that flattens time. Then everything went wrong at once. A jolt, sharper than a hard break. An ugly shriek of metal louder than any sound should be inside a small space. The kind of noise that rearranges your insides. People gasped in the same breath, as if they were one animal. Bags slid. A phone hit the floor and skittered. The car tilted, not a dramatic movie tilt, but enough to make your body lunge to correct it. I reached for the back of the seat in front of me. My fingers missed. The man in the blue jacket pitched forward. For a fraction of a second I registered the back of his neck, a mole below his hairline, the seam of his collar, and then he wasn't there. It was fast and it was final. My brain misfired, trying to label what I'd seen. I think decapitated is the only accurate word, but in the moment there wasn't language, just a white gap where a person had been. The lights flickered. Sparks hissed from an overhead panel. The smell changed, catching in my throat, burning insulation, something acrid. Someone screamed in a way that made other people start screaming. The far end of the car spat flame, small at first, hungry and bright, and the heat licked up the wall and rolled toward the ceiling. A child cried for a mother who was already saying, I'm here, at a pitch that sounded like she was saying it to herself too. The world tilted again, and this time it didn't stop at a tilt. The car slid. For a crazy moment it felt like sledding, a low rumble, a gliding. Then there was light, open space, then no space at all. The car left the bridge and fell. The sensation of falling inside a box is spectacularly helpless. Your stomach waits on a floor that isn't there. People rose out of their seats like they were being lifted. There wasn't time to think I was going to die. There was only the impact. The car hit water, so hard it felt like the water punched back. Cold swallowed everything. My ears filled. The lights went black, then a muddy green. I could hear the roar of bubbles and the thud of heavy things shifting. I kicked. My knee collided with something metal. Pain flared and vanished under the cold. My lungs burned immediately with the panic breath you take when you know you shouldn't. I tried to angle up, tried to find up, hands flailing for a surface. My fingers slid across the ceiling. No, the floor, no, the window. There was no up. There was only water and the terrible certainty that I wasn't getting out. I drowned. And then I woke up in my bed in the dark, air tearing into my chest. My heart was galloping. Sweat cooled on my back. For a few seconds the room didn't look like my room. When it did, I lay there and said out loud, "You're fine." I drank from the glass on the nightstand. I turned the pillow to the cool side. I stared at nothing and waited for the adrenaline to leak out. Eventually I drifted off. The dream started again as if someone had rewound the tape and hit play. The train, the man in the blue jacket, the hum, the wrongness arriving like a knife, the scream of metal, the flame, the fall, the water, the drowning. Same angles, same details. I woke up at the same point with the same panic breath clawing at my throat. I got up that time. I sat on the edge of the bed and put my feet on the floor to convince myself of it. I thought about turning on a light, then didn't. The dark was better. I told myself it was just one of those sticky dreams that repeats, and it would pass if I gave it a little distance. When the shaking in my hands settled, I tried sleep again because it was a work night and I didn't have the luxury of staying up to negotiate with my own head. The dream returned a third time, as exact as a photocopy. Then a fourth. By then I knew when each moment would arrive, like standing in a line of dominoes watching the next one tip. I knew the flicker before it flickered, the spark before it spat, the flare of heat, the grab for the seat back, the part where the world fell away. The knowledge didn't help. I still drowned, and I still woke up every single time at the same point, gasping like I'd sprinted. Morning felt thin and used up. I took a shower that was too hot and didn't do anything. Coffee tasted like a decision I'd made wrong. My skull had that cottony feeling it gets when your body is awake, but your brain is not convinced. I dragged myself into work anyway, because that's what you do. I remember the fluorescent corridor and the scuffed baseboards, and how the elevator's mirrored interior made my face look flatter than usual. I walked past the volunteer desk, which always had a messy stack of local newspapers nobody claimed. I wasn't thinking about the dream in a meaningful way. I was thinking about finding a chair and not moving. The headline reached me before I reached the desk. My brain read it from the corner of my eye and needed a second to agree with itself. A train had derailed the previous evening. It had gone off a bridge into a river. The photograph was small and gray and ugly. Emergency lights like misplaced stars on the shore, a dark shape where a car had met water. The caption listed a time that made my throat go tight, about when I'd been asleep. I picked up the top paper and read the first paragraph because I had to, and the words were so calm they felt obscene. Throughout the day more details trickled in the way they do, colleagues with phones out, a TV in the lobby whispering headlines. Later it came out that the crash produced some horrific injuries, and that among the dead was a man who'd been decapitated. The word landed different the second time around. It had weight, like a thing you could put on a scale. I don't have a conclusion. I didn't dream lottery numbers or save anyone's life. I didn't call a hotline 5 minutes before it happened and alert the authorities. I had a nightmare on loop, and then I read the news. The world didn't ask anything of me beyond coping. But it stuck because of the way the two things nested. The exactness of the dream, the fact of the headline, the way the details overlapped like tracing paper.